Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove, which is a conversation with playwrights and theater makers from the Alcove New Play Development Program. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm a playwright and the artistic director of the Alcove. I'm going to start with a brief audio description and then let you know who our guest is today. It's on the other side of the screen. I'm a fair-skinned person with brown auburnish hair. Today I'm wearing it up, and I have fluffy bangs on my forehead. And I have glasses that are perched at the edge of my nose. They're kind of, are they round? They're sort of roundish, rectangular-ish. I'm wearing a black top with faux pearls around my neck. And the top is like a t-shirt top. And behind me is a white background. You'll see the outline of a lamp in the corner. It is a real lamp, but it's not on right now. Today's amazing guest is Kirsten Greenidge, who is a wonderful, wonderful playwright with like 1,000 plays to her name. Not really, not 1,000, but it feels like, a long body of work. I'll briefly read a bio from their website, but of course you can always go there and find out more. Kirsten Greenidge is a playwright from Boston, Massachusetts. Hey, Boston. Growing up, she regularly wrote, I want to know about this, and produced plays with the other kids in her neighborhood. What? Oh my gosh. Okay, I want to know it, as well as her sisters, and began taking theater classes at Wheelock Family Theater. I don't know this place, so I'd love to know more about that. While still in high school, she attended Wesleyan University as a history major, U.S. history major, I should say, studied playwriting with Dara Cloud, won her first playwriting award. Soon after, went to the playwrights workshop at the University of Iowa. Very famous. If you don't know it, it's very famous. Their work has been done all over the country. Some of their well-known plays are Milk Like Sugar, The Luck of the Irish, Sans Culottes, and The Promised Land. I think one of the first plays I read of yours. Bossa Nova, there's another play I think I read of yours very early on. And more and more and more. They're a playwright in residence at Company One Theater in Boston, Massachusetts. They also teach playwriting at Boston University, and they have a fancy title, which we'll get to in a second. But for now, welcome, Kirsten, and thanks for making time.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I too am wearing glasses. They're just clear colored. I have straightened black hair. I am a Black woman, and I'm wearing a sweatshirt that says, it might be backwards. It says Martha's MV, Martha's Vineyard, and Inkwell. So that's where we often spend our summers, which sounds very fancy, but this is my cousin's house that we are able to stay in for a few weeks. And we actually, my sister and I work through our vacation, but it's lovely to be in a beachy place.
Super, super cool. So for those of you who follow the series, I start the conversations with the same question for everyone, which has to do with the climate crisis and how is the crisis affecting your art practice, methodology, and thinking about theater?
I think possibly on several different levels. One is that I right now I'm working on a commission with ART and a consortium at Harvard that gathers faculty from all different disciplines to think about climate change. And so I will admit that I'm a little behind on that commission. However, what it's really forced me to do is how to write about climate change and climate crisis in a way that is going to engage people, in a way that is going to be urgent, but not in a way that repels people from wanting to learn about a topic and invoke change. So with that piece, I'm very mindful that what I want to do is incite some sort of change or action call. And the reason why I'm so late on this commission is I'm like, what is that call? I somehow have some ideas about what I want to write about, but it really is at the end of that play, what do I want an audience to get up and do, since the crisis is so dire? I have a play that just closed here in Boston, called Morning, Noon, and Night. And how that play came to be is that a few years ago, I have two children. They are now teenagers. But a few years ago, when my oldest was in middle school, I said something like, you need to do your homework. And she said, I really don't need to do my homework because we have 12 more years until we can't live on Earth anymore. So I don't think anyone should do homework. Well, I will explain too that she went to a very progressive pre-K through 8th school. So their curriculum was tied to, their science curriculum was tied to activism and agency. And so she was in it. She was going to protests and things like that. And she was really trying to make sense of what is our future. That is a feeling that was very new to me. I remember her birthday when I was younger, and I too went to progressive schools as well. But I don't think I felt that in 12 or so years, that there was a finite number of years where the earth looks uninhabitable. So that filtered in, that ends up being something that one of the young characters in that piece thinks deeply about.
Cool, cool. And I love this no homework. No
She does her
homework
homework
thing.
now. She does her homework now. She is
Oh,
actually
okay.
change and wants to go into some sort of political science journalism major to be able to evoke change. So she's moved away from that feeling of it being things feeling.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Well, it's certainly understandable. So I sometimes wonder myself, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like we should be out of the streets, protesting every day, and taking to task, the people that are directly responsible for the damage that has happened to the planet. And continues to be happening. As we mentioned, has focused on subject matter. And I guess I just wonder a little bit about form, and whether the form of what your either current plays or plays you want to write, or in the future, or past plays, have connected with the climate crisis, or maybe just how you think about form as a writer, and tied to subject matter, and how that sort of, because form and function go together, right? So how do you think of those when you start a play?
I think, especially in this example, my question to myself is how do I want audience to interact, engage with this material? Are they part of the piece? So in my mind, I'm just like, how would I situate audience? Is this promenade theater? Is it immersive theater? Is it something that needs to, given the seriousness of the call to action, does it need to involve audience in a way that where they're not passive? So I think I've been thinking a lot is, what kind of stage does this piece need to take place on? Is it on a moving? At one point, I was like, is it on a moving vehicle? Because I was very getting into the idea of climate refugees and what that might look like. It feels like in America or the U.S., Northern America, that like that can't happen here, and yet there are people who, because of changes in weather patterns and intense storms, effectively cannot live where they grew up or where they had intended to live. And then I was like, well, Kirsten, how does that work if you're on a bus, you're spewing diesel around a city? So I'm thinking a lot about form in that play.
Yeah, more generally, so I don't want to tie it completely to the crisis that we're living through, but also more generally, how do you approach form as a writer? So do you start, I know some writers start with the shape of the play first. Some people are like, no, the characters are speaking to me, but at some point a form sort of develops. So yeah, so how do you, on a technical level, how do you go about structuring your work? And you can maybe take some examples from your body of work.
Yeah, it is shifted. I'll go with this latest play, Morning, Noon, and Night. Play is 3 pieces. I won't necessarily say acts. Acts are often the hardest thing I find when I'm as a teacher. What is an act? How long does it have to be? What is it? What stipulates an act? But it's 3 pieces, and I very much wanted to contain myself because I often write lots and lots of characters, and I was very interested in containment. So I chose a container that I knew was going to have to be parts, it knew it needed to be some sort of movement, like a musical piece movement, where you've got variations on a theme, but something different is happening in each one. That automatically told me, okay, if it's morning, noon, and night, I've got unity of time in some way. So that got me very excited that I need action to be able to reach a finite conclusion during these three pieces. So for that piece, I very consciously thought about form. I think Sean LeCount, who is the artistic director at Company One, was laughing, or I think found it humorous that I wanted to constrict. He's like, "Why would you want to do that?" And I can tell you why. A few years ago, I had another play that was three acts, the way we often experience them, and that was all about taking up space. That was a play built for. There were two men in it, primarily women, primarily Black women, and I wanted to make sure that they took up as much. That this play took up as much space as a three-actor from like mid last century, filled with all white male people, like all that space that they're afforded. I was like, this is it. Now the play's never been done again. So what does that tell me about American theater? I don't know. It also is the pandemic. So nothing is the same way as it was 6 or 7 years ago. But that was intentionally wanting my characters to take up space, make that big thing be big, and feel like one of those large juggernaut plays that some of us may have grown up reading, seeing, learning about. So in that way, I was like, yeah, it's got to be big. We got to have big emotions, big epic things happening for these people intentionally, to put people of color in spaces, and for a long time in spaces, in an intentional way.
Oh, that's amazing. And bigness and epicness, can take many forms, right? As well, it can also be like, I sometimes when I talk to students about a play like Carol Churchill's Far Away, or Adrian Kennedy's Funny House of a Negro. These are, in terms of length, they're short, but in scope, they're massive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that sometimes in U.S. theater specifically, there's a kind of misunderstanding around scope and scale, that it's only equated with if you have like tons of people on stage. I've seen a lot of, I'm not going to name names, but I've seen a lot of plays that have tons of people on stage that actually don't have scope. Mm-hmm. Or scale. They have just a lot of people on stage. And I'm like, okay, like, good for you, but like, what's happening? And I've seen plays that have 2 or 3 people, or even 4, and it just feels like the whole world is there, right? So I think this is something that also students, speaking specifically of students, but also the field, tends to kind of misunderstand. So I guess my question is a 2-part question. One, maybe I'll start with students first. So how do you work with students to kind of like speak to them, or work with them, or give them approaches around understanding? Because really, when we're talking about scope, it has to do with depth. It's a sense of verticality in playwriting, actually, but sometimes it can be horizontal. But I think it still has to kind of have roots. It has to just go down into the ground, and also feel like it's going upward, right? So, and I think that's when you feel depth in a play. But so, how do you work with students around this, especially students that may or may not have any theater awareness? They may be, I don't know. I mean, most people, I would imagine, unless they've seen a lot of musicals, which are awesome, by the way, don't know a lot about plays. Can I just say, it's not like on the tip of their tongue. And so the reference points may be television and streaming, which have different ways of operating with an audience, the different kinds of engagement with audience. So that's one. And the second part of the question, of course, has to do with our field and ways of thinking about change at a time when we are in, I think, a sea change, but I think it's very slow coming. So yeah, students first, because that's the hope, and hope and dreams. And there's like the field, yeah.
I think that when I'm talking with students about building rich worlds and representing them on stage, I will often become very Socratic in my teaching methodology, just asking lots of questions. And usually that begins to break apart the world. Like if you think of, oftentimes I think of, oh, placing a world on stage and you're not always sure what is each corner of that space, how high does it go, how, as you mentioned, how deep do those roots go, usually to help a student develop that is asking tons and tons of questions and being very certain, very understanding and transparent that they don't have to know the answers to the questions. I'm going to ask 20 questions about this a character. You don't have to know any of them, but it begins to chip away at that basically that iceberg getting deeper and deeper with those students. I find that because so many of students are encountering stories through streaming, through a visual medium, a lot of it is trying to figure out, why does this need to be a play? Plays can be very visual. We can have spectacle, but there's something about words and verbiage that is going on in a play that is different. It also, I noticed a lot of students, a first play now different than maybe 20 years ago when I first started teaching, 20 years, oh gosh, 30 years ago. Uh, uh, I'll notice a lot of stage directions that are actually like camera angles. So it's also like breaking down that way. That's what you see, but what is actually happening in bodies and space on stage. Questions though, we often use I call it the Liz Lerman Light method, because when I teach at Boston University. When I first came to Boston University, I'd have these large writing classes. And so I wanted to do the 4-point method, but I was like, this is taking a long time. And I'm not sure if I can get through this all. So I truncated a little bit. But that methodology shifts whether or not we're in community, in a class, or that it's one-on-one. But it's a lot of questioning of students, the world that students are creating, and talking about action. So these are the things a lot of them are, I teach in a conservatory program. So a lot of them have developed a lot of feelings about Aristotle, as do I, and as do other people. It's just one method. But one thing I'm always often asking them is, what is the action of the play, and how does each character relate to that action? If they don't, and you're doing something different, that is perfectly fine. But as an artist, it's your responsibility to know what you're doing. So you can throw that away. You can be like, I'm not gonna worry about all those things. I'm not gonna have a central character that has need. Great. As long as you have the ability to explain that. That's not interesting to you. My stories are circular, and I'm going to do that instead. Triangle. And then remind me of the second part of the question. We've got some.
The second part of the question. The second part of the question has to do with the field, relationship to looking at plays, thinking about new writing. Also, the fact that we're in what I have called a sea change in our field, and I think that it feels a little bit like things are in disarray, and also very narrow and provincial in many ways, getting narrower. When I, my personal feeling is that it's hard because of finances, but I feel like what we should be doing is expanding, like at least trying to be expansive, because this is no time from a political angle, to be safe. It feels like we need to be bold and adventurous, but I feel like our field, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is trying to kind of not be bold and adventurous. So I guess the question more has to do with how new writing is apprehended, how you feel new writing is apprehended in the field, and around form and function, and also depth and scale?
I think there is a primacy, as there often is, on youth and newness in our field. And I'm wondering, my big wonder is if our field can retain that, searching for other ways to tell stories and new voices, without basically becoming so anxious about what newness is, and about the capitalist thread that is now woven through our industry. I think that's what makes people really scared, is money and resources. How do we reallocate those resources in a way that can provide stability so that people can do their art and be change agents? I mean, when you're seeing oftentimes when you're seeing a play, you're seeing something or somebody's journey change through time. And we should be leaning into that and be thinking that is exciting. I think, to your point, we are maybe not seeing those stories are always as exciting as they could be, because change provokes a lot of anxiety. The fact that it seems so fervorous now is oddly hopeful, because hopefully that means that people are getting so nervous that it's because you're actually seeing some change along the way. But I think post-pandemic, hoping that theaters would return to some sort of health, and then you've got to ask, like, what was it like before, and how was it healthy, and was it open to many voices, many different artists practicing? The answer is no. And I think there was that shining moment when everything was shut down. It was like, what could come out of these ashes? I think what's so disheartening is that it's just been very, very difficult for people to do their art and to bring those new stories to the stage in a way that I guess is not surprising, but it's just disappointing. And theater has kept on for generations and generations, and found its way out of the ash heap over and over and over again. And I think it's because at some level we are presenting very human stories, and that's what we want to often audiences want to see. We want to see that humanity on stage wrestling with something. And yet now we're at a moment where AI could take over, and doesn't feel as human as it could be. So there are all these quotients that were not there necessarily before. But we have found ways to deal with technology and how it meets our field in the past. And I'm hoping we can still be able to tell these stories about humanity while interrogating form and function. We're obviously not there, though. We're in a very fraught moment in terms of our field.
Yeah, super fraught. And I think I also feel not only super fraught, but also that we don't have a lot of time. Like, I feel, given that we are in a climate crisis, I also feel like, first of all, our industry, for the most part, I'm still waiting for like every theater in the country that is still standing to sign a commitment to going green. Like, literally, like, why isn't that happening? That should have happened like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? So I feel like, so on a practical level, on a material level, even though there are discussions about, maybe this production will be green, and maybe I don't see like a field-wide, like, hello, we really gotta band together, and wouldn't that be glorious? Like, every theater in the country just like signing and saying, yes, we will go green, and mean it for real, and do every single production in a sustainable, ecologically sustainable way. And so I feel like, so there's that I feel needs to happen. But at the same time, this kind of like return to a sort of status quo, which is a broken status quo, from 2018, 2017. You know what I mean? Just go back. It feels like we're going even more backwards. you know, is doesn't make sense because the world has changed and the world is changing. And I think that one of the strengths of theater is that our responsibility to adapt and evolve as the world changes, and as audiences changes as well. You know, I think that I was speaking to a colleague that shall remain nameless, but they were talking about, well, I think if we program like the next 5 years really super safe, we can then do something really adventurous. And I was like, dude, you know, like the Atlantic Ocean is warming. Like, you know, I don't know what this 5 year plan is to do super safe stuff. Like, it just feels misguided. So I feel like there's a lot of, what I'm saying is that I feel like that there doesn't seem to be clear visionary sort of proposals being put forward on a mass scale in our industry. And so as a result, it's what I call short-term thinking is what's happening, right? So we get like, well, if I just do these 2 seasons that are blah, 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 I will do the next. And it's like, I think that, you know, we see it on a political scale that short-term thinking is useless, and actually gets us into hot water down the pike, right? So these are like Band-Aid fixes. And I feel like, you know, one of the things about 2020, which was, you know, obviously devastating and tragic and is continuing to be tragic, is that, but for a moment, I was saying to myself the other day, speaking as I do sometimes to myself, which is that there was something kind of extraordinary about seeing theater artists and companies suddenly go, oh, we can find a way to do this in alternate ways because we love theater.
Yeah.
And I feel like this kind of like false reset that's happening right now is isn't coming from that love. It's coming from as you said, a capitalist kind of mentality of like, oh well, I need to get butts in seats. And it's like, actually, can we reignite the love? Because that's what we need to do. And from that, maybe some change, actual change will occur. I don't know if any of this is resonating with you. I'm just throwing it out there.
No, it is. Thinking about like planning and to this colleague who will remain nameless, that if we, you know, that there's not an impetus to change necessarily, and perhaps for some theaters and some theater makers in our industry, there's no payoff to change as well. But it's like a what comes first necessary. You know, if people do seem to often, these audiences I come into contact with see shows and they are excited to learn something new. Usually, it's interesting. Some of the best feedback I get is I didn't know that before. Whether it's how a parent would react to a child, whether it's a larger global topic, I find that interaction and experience and iterating verbal acknowledgement of theater experience more common than not when I come to play my own plays. So I do think in terms of our leadership, there is a short-sightedness or an inability to think of ways, a different way of how to be and how to do our art. And certainly feeling that pinch of like, okay, we've just come out of that hard time. We didn't come back the way we thought. Theaters are shutting down. A lot of programs that would nurture future voices are shutting down. But I think it does take somebody or some organization to say, we're just going to do it anyway.
Right.
And we're going to figure out a way anyway, because we may not be here in 5 years if we do not.
Yeah, you know, and we don't know what sea levels are going to be like, and like, you know, yeah, I think that go big, go bold before we go away is always my motto. And also because I think that, you know, as long as I remember, and maybe you feel similarly, I don't know, Kirsten, but I feel like I've been hearing like, where's our audience? I've been hearing that for like over 20 years. Like, oh, we need to find an audience. And where are they? We need to find, and all I just keep saying is change your programming. Change your programming, literally change your programming, change the way you do things, and how you welcome people into your space and what makes it affordable. Like there are ways where you find your audience. It's just that and so, and I think that there's, and I don't know, I've been saying that for 20 years, and the question keeps happening: where are they? How do we get them back? I'm like, well, yeah, there are some very simple things that you can do. Like,
Well,
and it may not be easy at first. That's the thing.
Yeah, it may not be easy at first, and some things may feel like you're failing at first, but if you have a strong vision, you're going to figure out ways to get to that end point if it's strong enough, if it's enough of a beacon to you. I mean, my kid just hit me up for an exorbitant amount of money for We Are Not Rich. Better off than many, but exorbitant amount of money for a ticket to see this obscure musician. And part of me is just like, well, if this kid can say, this is of value to me, and I will go seek it out. And I think sometimes we are in this mentality of like of not being able to do that work and reach the people who might want to see the plays that one is producing.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back to how you got started in writing. I'm captivated by this little anecdote in your bio about making plays in your neighborhood, and like, so what prompted you to like start making plays? I'm so curious.
Well, when I was really little, I'm talking a toddler level, I really became enamored with the Wizard of Oz and enacting the Wizard of Oz. So I would just reenact it over and over and over again. And at that point, I was almost 3 years old. And then my mom took me to go see The Wiz, first iteration of The Wiz on Broadway. And I think both my parents thought, well, she's little, but if she gets unruly, I was also very frenetic, kinetic, very always in my body. And so they figured, well, if she can't handle it, we'll take her out at intermission. And I did not want to leave at intermission. And so like, oh, I guess this is, she's like, there's not a term for it. They didn't know, like a theater kid. So my sister was born, and she was a great company member because she didn't talk much and you could make her be things. And then she got to be a little older. We moved to Boston, and these 2 little boys moved next door. They were from Sweden. I don't think they'd ever met, their mom was from the US, but I never met any Black people. I don't think it's like, is this what this is? This is great. And 4 of us, my sister, myself, and those 2 little boys, created a theater company. And they were very much into we had different styles of theater. So for us, that meant like, don't choose one. The experience is like an afternoon with us, for the 4 of us. What parent wouldn't want to spend 5 cents to sit in their own living room and watch these theatricals that we were putting on? So that was really the beginning, and more neighborhood kids would get to want to be it. We were also the oldest, myself and the little boy who was the eldest son in that family. So even if kids weren't that interested in theater, there's the allure of being chosen by an older kid. And so we created this theater company. We had concessions. The concessions were meant to pay for our, I don't know, our advertising. I'd take out I'd put everything on a typewriter and stick stuff up. That was really beginning of thinking about theater in that way, in terms of making things. That oldest son of that family got his doctorate, and his speciality is images of people of color in 17th century French drama. So somehow it stuck with both of us. He doesn't practice it. That's something I'm really excited about. When I was really primarily, when I was younger, a gymnast. So I did not think I could be 2 things at once, and probably not. That's a lot. It's a lot of after school stuff. So in high school, after I quit gymnastics, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I knew I loved the theater, and I started taking classes at Wheelock Family Theater, which at the time and still is a forerunner in Boston in terms of assembling casts for plays that are multi generational and multiracial. So I did 2 professional shows with them. I did Peter Pan, and I know Peter Pan is problematic. Back then, it was problematic, but they changed some things around, and it was not as problematic as the original was. And then Tuck Everlasting. I was in the chorus play. And then I got to college, and I was writing plays on my own, and it was after rehearsal one night. I think the play was, gosh, maybe it was when I was in ADing for Steel Magnolias. I don't know why, I just blanked. But anyway, someone said, "This playwriting class is running, but we don't have enough people." And so I said, "Well, I've been writing plays." And then that began the forward motion. And having Dara Cloud, playwright and screenwriter, as a teacher was really instrumental to me as well.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating, this trajectory. And were you ever an actor?
Oh, yes.
You say with some caution. What does that mean?
Terrible stage fright. I was so wooden. I was not a I loved performing when it was just like doing something rolling around the floor. Maybe I should have been like a modern dancer or something like that. But in terms of like learning lines and the work of it that it takes to approach a role, just freaked me out. My last play was in college. I was in George Wolfe's The Colored Museum. That was a huge shift to me in terms of what plays could be, what stories can we tell. I was like, oh my gosh, I did not know we could just lay it all out there like that and put these things on stage. So that was a crucial part in terms of me as a theater artist. Line like threading the needle between being in that piece and being immersed in that show and that play, and then a few years later reading Susan Laurie Parks's the essays in her America play volume, and really threading the needle in terms of what kind of what kind of people and characters do I want to put on stage, and why. And going back to form, what form is the best way to elicit some sort of response from an audience? That's one thing that is difficult, that it is exciting to teach to students, but is that being able to build a relationship, and it's up to you what that is. But being cognizant that when you are writing for the stage, you are building a relationship with an audience. And what do you want that to be? And how do you want to nurture that? Is it I teach at the college level. So is it to shock? It's just oftentimes it is. Or are you shocking on page 30 and you're going to lose everybody between page 30 and 60? And you, as a playwright, you want them still there. You might want them still there at page 60. So how do you do that? How do you temper that? How do you elicit a response to cultivate a relationship with an audience in a way that gets your point across and doesn't necessarily have people walk out? Although sometimes that is the exercise of the play. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to, if that's what it is, you're meant to elicit it, some sort of response, some sort of call to action, then go for it. Just being very intentional about what you're doing.
Yeah, totally. You have such a massive body of work, and obviously you've been building it for years. And I wonder how you sustain your practice. Like, how do you keep going? Because I actually think that it's slightly harder the more you write, the more you've been doing this for a while, to actually kind of get up and they go, okay, I'm gonna make up another play today. You know what I mean? I think because I think because there's a lot of opportunities for early career artists in our field, and so what happens when you hit kind of mid-career and into whatever words people use, established or et cetera, suddenly those opportunities vanish, and there's this assumption that you kind of just like I'm just going to make a play anyway, and I think that actually, it can be quite difficult. Also because you've written a lot, so you sort of know a lot of the tricks, a lot of the things you've done before. So how do you keep surprising yourself and sustaining yourself as an artist?
Oh, that is a good question. I think, well, there's when I lean into interrogating form, because I'm almost, David Hancock, the playwright David Hancock, I remember came to speak to us when I was at Iowa and said, like, basically playwrights usually have about 6 characters in them that they're gonna keep writing about over and over and over again. He's like,
Yeah.
so don't always go looking for the new thing you're gonna do, like embrace that. Because you're probably going to be until you're done working that thing out. That's probably what your plays are going to be and sound like. So in later years, I've thought like, well, what could I do that is different? I'm still probably going to write about some of the same things. In the last 2 years, I've gotten very into, which is the kind of theater I don't like, but I'm like, but I like making it. Promenade, immersive theater. We did a play about a school board we put it in a school, and it was basically, for a few years in there, I got very interested in like palindrome type of ways of creating plays. So you had a beginning scene, and then that play had basically three plays that were running concurrently. So we broke the audience into 3 parts, and they saw different pieces, the same scenes, but they were ordered differently, and then they all came back again. And that was amazing. It was like working. I haven't done movies, but it was like working on a movie set in terms of like just the way we scenic design the school. And it was great. But finding ways for me that are exciting and new for me to enter material, even though my work has a mission statement. I'm writing plays for actors of color, primarily women of color, to be on stage. I am writing plays often about parent and progeny, but finding different ways to interrogate that. In terms of it takes, I know when I was younger, I used to have this little sign on my computer that said, "Are you a writer or not?" And it was like the size of a fortune cookie thing. And so I found that asking myself that question, and the answer is yes. Are you a writer or not? Yes, I am a writer. So now this is what I'm going to do. Not every play is going to be great, but I'm going to keep doing it over and over again. I also really love, this sounds somewhat trivial. I love reading biographies of artists, of writers and artists. When you look at long-term an artist's trajectory, they are often writing about the same thing. And just you are not done writing about that thing does not necessarily mean you change because critics or audience say do something different. Artists are going to artist, so to speak. And you also have to trust that eventually that audience will come back to you in some way. But it is true. This is a young person's game in terms of pay scale, in terms of opportunity. When you get to be 45, it's not so cool to go to a city and stay on someone's couch for 4 weeks and do a play. You could embrace it as a challenge. I know that I'm not embracing that. I'm like, I can't do this for 6 weeks and be here and work thing and get paid nothing. So you do have to trust that those opportunities are going to come around again. And when you don't find them, figure out how to get them. And that's where I've been in the business for a long time. Not just training in terms of craft, but training in terms of how do I pursue those opportunities and find my works read and
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We're almost at time, so I wanted to sort of see. I wanted to touch on this question about other art forms that maybe inspire you. That maybe, I know, for example, that I get really inspired by dance, right? Like to me, like I go see a dance piece and it makes me want to write. Not that I'm saying I don't like seeing plays, but I feel like something about seeing dance, because it's not my medium, liberates me, and I kind of start dreaming of things as I'm watching the dance piece, and I come back home and I'm like, wow, I want to make this thing, and also because I think there's really cool experimentation happening in the dance world. So so I wonder what other art forms inspire you, and if at all.
I'm sure that other art forms do inspire me. What the thing my brain is thinking of first is as I said before, I was a gymnast. Is I love watching sports and thinking about the training that goes into those sports to be able to get that product. So if my mind deconstructs it, it's like this is like building up to a performance. So I find watching sports, particularly gymnastics, rhythmic gymnastics, uh, ice skating, synchronized swimming, those types of sports that have that artistry built in. One of the most inspiring parts of my life in terms of generating work was also a time when usually often parents aren't able to generate work, is when I had rather young children. So I had my oldest, the one who was in the who with the homework,
Yeah.
Was a rhythmic gymnast for a little bit. And it was so inspiring. I got a lot of work done sitting in that gym and having listening to these coaches, and they were from Russia, Romania, Ukraine. There's a different way of interacting with child gymnasts in those countries, and maybe it's because of my own background in the sport. I was like, I will sit in this waiting room and I will write, and I will just write while these coaches are being like, nyeh, nyeh, nah. So what does that say about me that I found that invigorating? I don't know, but it was very inspiring. What also it does is those sports, if you watch a really talented dancer or gymnast, how they get to be that good is by repeating over and over again and relying on technique. And so I found that very inspiring as well. What that also does is it means that myself as an artist, I can only really speak for myself, is that the inspiration and the ability to muse art is not left to someone else. You are in control of that. And I find that very, very helpful as an artist, because so much is out of our control. You cannot help if nobody likes your play and hasn't found the right people. You have to, keep sending that one out, but you got to start a new one. You can rely on my practice as a writer. I can rely on my practice as a writer, on a technician, and I find that very comforting in spaces where not everyone's going to like your work all the time.
Yeah, I hear you. It's so tricky, this question of approval, because I think that sometimes you just have to do what's in your, you don't know. You just don't know what's going to strike a chord, like how it's going to land. You can try to predict it, but I think it's very mysterious. And I think that you also have to do what's in your heart. Like you have to do, like, I have to write this. I don't know why, but I have to write this thing. And I hope someday people will connect to it. Like, you know what I mean? Because I think that trying to kind of like, I see sometimes writers kind of trying to re-engineer that process of going, well, let me make something so that I can get approval. And I just don't, I just think at the end of the day, like, you can't really predict, again, because the world changes and people change, and like what they respond to is different. And our field takes such a long time to put a new play up to begin with.
Yes.
So in a way, you're always playing catch up with the world. So I think that write what you feel, what's in your heart, and I feel like somehow, hopefully that will transmit,
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Very much do know. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're at time, because I want to make sure that we don't keep people over. What a joy an honor to have you here with us today, Kirsten. It's such a pleasure. I wanted to lift up your work. I hope people seek your work out. A lot of it is published, so you can buy the books, everyone. Buy the books, and experience it on the page. I know it's not the same as seeing it, but it is a way of interacting with Kirsten's work. And what I usually do, as you know, for those of you who've been following the series, I do a little wave and goodbye, but I stay offline with the artists to say other goodbyes after I hit end recording. So for now, thanks for watching Conversations from the Alcove. Stay tuned with the rest of the series and the rest of the season, and see you on the other side.